Coffee at Lucy's. I moved to Rockwell about 3 months ago. I've worked for Starbucks for the last 3 years in a regional role in Arkansas, and one of the things I've been asked to do is to run stores for short periods when there is no shop manager available. The Rockwell gig came up, and I parachuted in to steady the ship, as it were. It's not a bad role. I get free rental accommodations, so my salary is basically just spending money. I don't get to stay in one place long, so I don't really get to make friends. I've never really managed to get much going on with the girlfriend front either. So yeah, I guess it's a little lonely. I don't always get told why there's a vacancy or what happened to the previous store manager. I wish I'd asked. With these short-term roles, I find that it's really all about clear expectations and standards from day one. It's great if I can grow sales or profits, but I'm not generally there long enough to do that. My job is to stop things going to shit more than it is to set the world alight, and standards are the key to that. So with that in mind, I always like to get in early to meet the team on day one. In this case, 6 a.m., the 11th of September 2017. Donnie was the first guy I met. He was surprised to see me on site. Seems like the last manager, a guy called Mike, wasn't one for early starts. I'd gotten there about 15 minutes before Donnie, and to be honest, the store looked okay. Standards-wise, this was going to be easy. The place looked clean and tidy, and the till and records all looked in decent order. There was only one thing I mentioned to Donnie, which was that there was an empty cup left on one of the tables in the corner. I told him I would speak to the late team about it. Donnie just said, sure. He seemed like an okay guy, friendly, with an easygoing nature, and I pegged him as a solid but unspectacular worker. The store was fairly quiet, nothing like the busy city center stores I'd run in the past. It looked like it was going to be a bit of a holiday working here. The town felt nice, the type of place you'd like to live if you were the settling down type. The records I'd gotten from the head office showed there were currently 7 in the team overall, and I planned to meet them all in my first week, give them all a pep talk and find out a bit about them all. They all seemed to have worked there forever, even back from before Starbucks bought the place up over a decade ago. It seemed odd, but a pleasant sort of odd to have people in the team who had worked here so long and seemed to care so much about the place. Being a barista isn't most people's idea of a career, so in coffee shops you are normally dealing with students, the odd part-time working mom, and the occasional retiree and the like. This was different. There's usually one problem member of the staff. I knew it would be Kenny straight away. He worked 2 p.m. to 10 p.m. and had done the night before I came, so he was the person I needed to speak to about the coffee cup that had been left out. I broached the topic with him in a friendly tone. Look, Kenny, it's important that you leave the store spotless, ready for the morning guys, and this morning when I got here, a cup had been left on one of the tables. He instantly glanced over to the table in the corner where the cup had been left, so I knew I was talking to the right guy. Sometimes things get missed, and that's not the end of the world, but I'm new here and I want to start as we mean to go on. So let's really focus on standards, shall we? He just nodded and said, sure. I left at around 8:30 p.m., having got a good feel for the store and the team, and left Kenny and the team to lock up. I was pretty pissed off the next morning when I came in to see another empty cup on the same table. When Kenny got in later that day, I took him to one side to have a little chat about standards. He looked very nervous and kept glancing over my shoulder to what I knew would be Mary, the other 2 to Tanner, listening in whilst pretending to serve customers. He swore he didn't leave the cup out, and I explained to him in no uncertain terms that it was very unlikely as he was responsible for locking up the store, so he was the last person in here. I didn't, it's just that... I waited, but he clammed up, then mumbled an apology, and an assurance that it wouldn't happen again. My alarm didn't go off, for whatever reason, so I didn't open the next day. But when I asked Donnie if there were any cups left out when he opened up, he assured me no. For the rest of that week, I had a few bits and pieces to sort out, so I didn't open up for the rest of the first week, but Donnie kept me in the loop, and it looked like our little Kenny problem was sorted. I was wrong. On the Sunday night of my first week, I couldn't sleep. At around 4 a.m. Monday morning, it became apparent that I was wide awake, so I went for a short run, a little under 3 miles, jumped in the shower, and headed over to the shop early. Lo and behold, there was another offending cup. Kenny hadn't worked the 2:10 that Sunday, so this was an interesting development. On all the other occasions, I had left the team to clear away the cup to make a point about responsibilities and standards, so I'd never actually taken a look at the cups. I picked it up. It was empty, barring the dregs, looked like black filter coffee, and smelt like it had sugar in it. It wasn't a Starbucks cup. It was some sort of generic takeout cup that you'd pick up from a restaurant wholesaler's. The handwritten name on the cup said Lucy, but what shocked me was that it was unmistakably my own writing. I still had the cup in my hand when Donnie arrived to open up. When he saw the cup in my hand, he sat at the next table from me and said, "Don't blame Kenny. He's a good guy, but you shouldn't sit at that table. Come sit here with me." And that's how I learned about Lucy. Starbucks bought the Rockwell joint about 10 years ago. Prior to that, it was an independent place called Lucy's, a real mom-and-pop shop that Lucy had opened in the 50s and run until she'd passed away in 2007. Starbucks swooped, and that brought us to today. "It's kind of a superstition, or maybe more of a ritual," Donnie told me. Every night, Lucy would close up and sit at that table where you are sitting now, in the corner, and drink a black 2 sugars coffee while she counted up the takings. She was in here every day until she was in her 80s, worked 12 hours or more, and ended every day in that spot in the corner, drinking her coffee. Heck, that chair you're sitting in now is where they found her body. She just passed away one night in the place that she loved, her place. They say it was a heart attack. That made my skin crawl a bit, and I stood up quickly, feeling fairly uncomfortable and strangely a bit embarrassed. When she first passed away, it was such a shock that on the first night we just poured her the usual coffee, out of a sense of honor or sentiment, I guess. And it kind of stuck as a tradition, so we leave her a coffee each night, the way she likes it. I guess you think we're a bunch of dumb, old, superstitious hicks. Wait, so you're telling me that you leave a coffee out every night and in the morning it's been drunk by the ghost of the former owner? I said, incredulously. I knew when I was being hazed. Occupational hazard for a new store manager, and certainly not the first time for me, but by far the most elaborate. Donnie just smiled at me. "Okay, fine," I said. "Good one. You got me. It stops today." I threw the empty cup into the trash and carried on getting the store ready. I like a good practical joke as much as the next guy, but not when it compromises standards. That night, I had to leave the store at about 8:30 p.m., and I really wanted to nip this nonsense in the bud, so I went back at about 11 p.m. after lockup. I figured that having been called out, the joke would have run out of steam, but I wanted to make sure. There was a cup on the corner table, another one of those generic cups, full and still warm with Lucy's name on it. Again, my breath caught when I recognized the handwriting. I can't deny I found it a little unsettling. I picked it up, ready to empty the coffee and bin the cup, but something stayed my hand. I placed it back on the table and locked back up. I was going to get in early to see what happened. All the cups I'd seen so far were empty. This one was full. Again, I couldn't sleep. Turns out the joke had got me better than I'd given it credit. I couldn't shake a sense of unease. It wasn't the cock and bull story about the ghostly Lucy drinking her phantom coffee. It was the fact that the writing on those cups was undoubtedly mine. One of the guys must be doing an incredible forgery, and it was all part of the joke. I'd planned to go in early anyway, and the sleepless night just made that a little easier. Donnie came in at 6:15 a.m., regular as clockwork. He found me sitting on the table he sat at the day before, cup in hand. "It's empty," I told him. "I know, James. She drank it all. She drinks it every night." was all he said to me, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. I spent the day in a haze, part shock and part sleep-deprived fog. What was going on here? I watched the store. No one, not a single customer, sat at that table all day. At one point, the shop was full and a young couple came in. They walked over to the corner table and got as far as pulling out the chairs to sit down, but the guy visibly shivered and stopped. "Let's drink these in the car, babe," he said, and she just nodded and out they went. I was creeped out. That night, I left early again with the intention of coming back after lockup. I went into the store and I was on edge. It seemed different at night, less familiar in the dark, like it somehow had a different look. I could see the cup on the table, and this time poured it straight down the sink and threw the cup in the trash. I was breathless with what? Fear, perhaps? As I left the store and locked up. I slept better that night and woke refreshed. I laughed at myself in the mirror after my morning run. It all seemed so ridiculous in the cold light of day. I can't believe I'd let myself get suckered in. The laughter stopped when I got to the store to see it had been ransacked. I was running a little late, having had such a good sleep and a longer run than normal, so Donnie was there with a couple of local cops. I went over to the group. "We've been broken into," I said, part statement, part question. "Sure looks like it. We get this sometimes. Kids, you know," answered one of the cops. "I'm surprised that even kids would trash Lucy's like this, though," mused the other as they wandered around writing notes and taking pictures of the scene. They took statements and timings from Donnie and I, and arranged to come back later at around 3 p.m. to talk to Kenny, who had locked up. I felt embarrassed telling the officers that I had come back to the store after closing. I didn't explain why, but Donnie was in hearing distance and shot me a glare. When the cops left, he came over to me. "You disturbed her drink, didn't you?" he accused. "Look, Donnie, there is no her," I shot back. Donnie stepped back and looked at me, a look in his eyes. What was it? Fear? Anger? I couldn't tell. I called all of the team in to help with clear-up. The place was a real mess. We had to stay closed for the day, as all of the milk and products in the fridge had spoiled. The kids must have turned the fridge off when they trashed the joint. It was on when I got there, but I presume Donnie had spotted it was off and flipped it back on again. Cleanup wasn't finished until about 9:30 p.m., and afterwards I got the team together. "I really appreciate you all coming in today to help out. It's terrible what has happened here. But I need to talk to you about this Lucy nonsense." Glances were exchanged amongst the team as I left the phrase hang in the air. "It was a great joke, and you all had me genuinely freaked out for a while, which is not easy to do, so great job. Now, I'm sure, and so are the cops, that this was the work of some bored kids. But I would hate to think that this was some element of a practical joke taken way too far." More furtive glances. "So you guys all head home. Everyone will get a full shift pay for today, and I'll talk to the head office about getting time and a half for it. And we'll open up again tomorrow. I'll close up and you guys can all hit the road." The team made their way out into the night, and I started to check around the store to make sure everything was shipshape before closing up. I was half out of the door when I heard a noise. I had already turned the lights off, and the dark seemed to muffle the noise. I listened harder, and I could make out a steady drip, drip noise, so I made my way behind the counter to turn off the tap that must have been left dripping. But when I got to the sink and checked the taps, they were completely off. Focusing in the dark, it became clear that the drip was coming from the filter coffee machine, and the liquid was dripping onto the plate. The machine was turned off, and the wall socket switched off too, but I unplugged it for good measure and made a mental note to call out an engineer in the morning. I picked up a cloth and wiped the spilt liquid from the plate when the noise of a chair scraping along the floor behind me scared the living daylights out of me. I whipped round and could see nothing and no one in the darkness. I stood motionless in the darkness, my heart hammering in my chest, and studied the room. All of the chairs were neatly tucked in under their respective tables. All except one. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see the corner table. and the out-of-place chair that Donnie told me that Lucy had been found dead in. I must have just stood there for a full minute, just breathing heavily, until I convinced myself nothing was untoward. It must have been a trick of the light that made the chair look out of place in my peripheral vision. When I looked properly, it was in place as neatly as all the rest. An active imagination, a couple of sleepless nights, and an unhealthy amount of flat whites is a potent cocktail, and I was jumpy as hell. I turned back to finish the cleanup, and as I touched the filter plate again, my hand flared up with pain. It was scorching hot, but as I tried to yank my hand away, I felt a hand grip mine and hold it down on the burning hot plate. The hand felt cold and dry, thin and gnarled and wrinkled, an old person's hand, an old woman's hand. I could smell coffee, cigarettes, and burning flesh as my hand was held there, and I could hear rasping breathing in my ear. I screamed with agony as my skin singed, and like that, it was over. The pressure holding my hand down was gone, and I yanked my hand free. I turned, and no one was there. I desperately looked around the shop to see who had done this to me, but after just a few seconds of searching, the pain was too great, and I went to the sink and ran my hand under the cold tap. I stayed there trying to cool down my hand and ease the pain. I dared not look. I had smelt the flesh cooking. It must be a grotesque mess. I needed to get to a hospital, but reasoned that the best I could do for myself right now would be to cool it to save myself from any long-term damage. I didn't even know where the nearest hospital was, and I wasn't sure I would be able to drive with my hand in this much pain. My hand had gone numb from the icy water, and when I guessed 10 minutes had gone by, I gingerly turned my hand over to inspect the damage. I was expecting a horror of burned flesh, but was faced with much worse. Nothing. Not a blister, not a blemish. I couldn't believe it. I touched it, and it felt normal, but the pain was real. I could feel its echo through the icy numbness. I just stared at it for a while before going over to the hot plate of the filter coffee machine. I gingerly touched the plate with my other hand. It was cold metal, no trace of heat. And what's more, the machine was unplugged. I'd done that myself before this whole incident. I clearly remembered doing it. My head was spinning, the machine was unplugged and cold, my hand was unblemished, but the pain was real, as was the memory of the cruel strength that held me there. I didn't go back to the shop the next day, or the day after. I just lay in bed tossing and turning, barely sleeping, in spite of feeling exhausted. My hand throbbed with pain, but there were no visible effects or marks to suggest anything untoward had happened. My world was collapsing in on itself. On the second night after the incident, I fell asleep sometime after 2 a.m. I slept for 16 hours, surfacing late afternoon. I rang into the shop with some story about a stomach bug that had kept me out of action. I had a dozen missed calls from Donnie, head office, and even one from one of the police officers. I said I would be coming in around 7 p.m. to stay until closing. I arrived at the shop at closer to 9 p.m. I had sat in my car parked across the street for 40 minutes, building up the courage to enter. My arrival barely registered. There were half a dozen customers, Kenny and Mary serving, and no one even looked up from their lattes. I was sweating and having palpitations just being in the place. I could sense her presence, Lucy, cruel and hating, and all directed at me. I was the outsider, the one who was trying to change things, and she wasn't going to let that happen in her place, the place that would forever be Lucy's. I stayed less than 10 minutes before making some excuse and leaving. I couldn't face the place the next day, so I went to the town library. I dug around in old town histories and newspaper archives and tried to piece together some backstory to the place. Lucy's had opened in 1956 and was a town fixture until she passed away, age 82, just over a decade ago. Lucy seemed to be a pillar of the community, churchgoer and charity figurehead, much beloved of the whole town. When Starbucks bought the place shortly after her death, there was a protest outside the store. No one at head office told me about that when I was given the assignment. I found an interview with Lucy from 2006 celebrating 50 years of her coffee shop in town. Interviewer: So, Lucy, you and your place are town institutions. No, more than that, you're town legends. What was it like opening a coffee shop all those years ago? Lucy: It was tough, I can't deny it. I was a widow at the age of 30. My husband died in an automobile accident, and I had to find a way to make a living. You wouldn't understand, but back then, women didn't work, see? And with my poor Lionel gone, I had to make ends meet. So I used the insurance money from my poor Lionel's passing to open the place up. I was the only woman in town who ran her own business. Interviewer: You sound very proud about that. Lucy: Hell yes, I'm proud. I put my blood and soul into this place to make it work. Interviewer: You seem to have a very loyal team. They all love working for you. Lucy: Well, I hope so. I treat them like family. Heck, half of them are. My philosophy is that if you're a part of my team, you deserve to be treated like you're always part of the team. Interviewer: Even if you go work for the competition? Lucy: No one ever leaves my team anyhow. And if you've tasted my coffee, you know there is no competition. Interviewer: Speaking of competition, is there any truth in the rumor that coffee giant Starbucks has made you an offer for the place? Lucy: They made me an offer. And you know what I told them? This is my place. This is Lucy's. This will always be Lucy's, and it'll be a Starbucks over my dead body. Interviewer's notes. Tragically, as you know, there was an ironically prophetic element of Lucy's last statement, as she sadly passed away just 2 nights after this interview, and before it was ever published. Even though I had drunk coffee at her place for years, I felt like this interview was the only real time I'd met her. She was a fierce and formidable woman, and that passion and determination that has made her a cornerstone of this town for so many years really came through in this interview. We lost more than just a coffee shop owner when we lost Lucy, and this town is worse off for it. The newspaper articles were an interesting read, but the 2 things that really shocked me were photographs I'd found. The first was a front-page splash that accompanied the news article about the anti-Starbucks protest. There at the heart of the action, bold as brass, holding a Cottage Grove Says No to Starbucks placard, was none other than Donnie. If that was the only place I had seen Donnie, or any of the rest of the team that day, it would have been bad enough. But in a ponderous local history book titled Rockwell, a 100-year celebration from 1986 with a sepia photo, the front of the shop was unmistakable, but the sign over the window then read, Lucy's for coffee. And Lucy was standing outside. She was a small woman, no more than 5 feet tall, but young then, being in her early 30s. She was fierce-looking in spite of her youth, but it wasn't Lucy who drew the eye. In this proud promotional photo entitled Grand Opening 1956, Lucy was surrounded by her team, 7 of them, 7 people I knew well, the same 7 that worked for me now: Donnie, Kenny, Mary, Chad, Margaret, Tony, and Carla. I Xeroxed a copy of the picture and took it with me to the shop the next day. I wanted answers. I texted Donnie and Kenny and asked them to swap shifts. It was Donnie I wanted answers from. I went to the shop the next day, just before 10 p.m., and went straight to Lucy's chair. I sat and looked over at Donnie. He stared at me while he finished serving the last customer of the night. He followed the customer to the door and locked it behind them, then came over to me. He wouldn't sit at my table, at Lucy's table, so he sat on the next one along. "How old are you, Donnie?" I asked. 34. You must know that from my employment records," he replied, staring at me coldly. I slapped a copy of the photo down on his table. "How is a 34-year-old in a picture taken in 1956, Donnie? How are you all in that photo?" He glanced down at the picture once, then studied me. "How's the hand, James?" he asked, holding my stare. I hadn't told anyone about the hand. He couldn't know unless he was there. I was angry now. What do you know about my hand? I demanded. It doesn't need to be like this, James. Lucy's a great boss. She'd love to have you on the team. I could suddenly smell cigarettes and coffee and feeling a rasping breath behind me. We're all happy here, James. There's a reason that we stay working here. Why we've always stayed working here, since the beginning. Lucy looks after us, James. We're like family to her. The last guy, Mike, he didn't understand. But I think you do. I think you want the same things we all want. To be happy. To feel like you belong. To be a part of the team. Isn't that what you want, James? I was trembling, close to tears. I want standards. Donnie carried on talking over me. Standards, James? Do standards make you happy? Do standards keep you safe? I stood weeping, unable to reply. She's a great boss, Donnie continued. She's looked after all of us for so many years. She still does. All you need to do is fix her up a cup of coffee, James. Can you do that, James? A coffee for Lucy? We are all faced with choices in life. What do we really want and need to make us happy? What was my life up to that point? A succession of meaningless 3-month stints in one place then another? What did I really want? To be settled, to be part of a team, to be looked after. I went over to the filter machine. 2 months on, and I'm happy here in Rockwell, and I don't ever want to leave. It says Starbucks above the door, but everyone knows this place is Lucy's. We have a new starter, a pretty young thing called Millie. She's been with us for a couple of weeks. We all like her. Lucy likes her. We think we want to make her part of the team. I've had the grand opening picture framed, and it's up behind the counter. There are 8 smiling faces now with Lucy. I'm stood near the back, and soon, Millie will be on there too. Once you're part of the team, you feel like you've been part of it forever.